I'm making this video today because it's one of the most common questions I get in my comments, whether it's a personal message or a comment on one of my videos, and it's how do the birds learn to come home. I'm gonna make this as easy an example as I can manage, I think. So say you've got your loft right here, okay? Oops, yeah, this is a pigeon loft, if you can't tell. Now, from my understanding, and what seems to be about right, is within a 17-mile radius, okay, the birds, they use their mapping ability. So what that means is they get around much like humans do. So if they see a river here or a mountain here and a satellite tower here, you know, whatever. I guess that looks kind of funny. They're going to use within the 17-mile radius of your loft, just like you would get around landmarks, sight, sound, smell even, and they really just make that their compass. Just like if you were to be at home, you could look kind of out and you could find out, okay, if the satellite tower's over here and the river's here and the mountain's there, I know that my house is going to be right there. Now outside of this 17-mile radius, it's believed that inside of a pigeon's beak, so I guess I'll make a pigeon's beak. Anyway, I'm not an artist by any means, but say that's the pigeon's beak. There's its eye. Okay, inside of its pigeon's beak, they believe that there's some metallic substances which allow the homing pigeon to triangulate itself with, say, northeast, south, and west with the North Pole. So just like if you were out of your home and you were able to know which direction was north, say if you were out here 30 miles away from your home, and if you at least knew where north was, you could kind of find out in which direction your home was. Now, there's something that I've learned, just being a human being, just going around and how people train birds in general and how to fly home fast. Now I don't have any racing pigeons, but I have trained my birds to come home, you know, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but about 60 miles from their loft. But what I've heard is the best way to train a bird is first you take them out, you know, maybe 1.1 miles, and that might be too far, you know, just depending on how new the birds are, and you might want to just start distance training them as far as that goes. And what you do is if you want them racing from a certain direction, you just take that number out further and further every time. So I found that about 1 mile away, I don't know why I did 1.1, but about 1 mile away, and then my next drop would say be 1.5 miles. My next drop would be 2 miles, and then I drop at about 4 miles. And then right about the 4 mile mark, once I've taken them out a certain distance at about 4 miles, I usually start doubling it up. Then I'd go 8 miles and then 16 miles. But what I'm doing is I'm always taking them out a little bit further in each direction. So say if you wanted to fly your birds from the east to the west, that's exactly what you'd do, is you'd start them out 1 mile east, 1.5 mile east, 2 miles east, 4 miles east. And what you'll notice is each time, and maybe you'll do 2 drops here, 3 drops here, 4 drops. So what you're doing is you're every time they do a drop, they get faster and faster. I remember when I had my birds out when I was first training them inside my valley, I had them coming in at 17 miles, and it took them a long time the very first time I dropped them out that far. I dropped them out there and it took them an hour and a half to get home. The very first time. The second time I dropped them off, it took them an hour to get home. And of course, they were just homing. They weren't they weren't racing birds or anything. But then the third time I dropped them off, it took them 28 minutes to get home. So each time they remembered where they were as soon as I let them go. And it's just like human beings. You know, if you're trying to navigate through a hiking path or something, you're always going to get faster because you know exactly where you're at. Now, one thing that I did, not realizing what I'd done, is I had taken birds out 17 miles. In my case, it was actually to the north, so they were flying south. So just to illustrate this is I went out and I dropped them 2 miles to the south, right? And what happened is they actually, from 2 miles to the south, they still kind of knew where they were at because they would loft fly around my house quite a bit and get a distance. But then the next time I let them go, I took them out 17 miles the opposite direction, and they had never even been that far. So they went out 17 miles. I was like, man, they should be able to figure it out because they were doing it in the complete opposite direction over here. But I took them out there. 30 minutes go by. I was like, uh-oh. An hour goes by, you know, and then finally an hour and a half goes by, and I still hadn't seen them. And then I was just like, oh man, I've really lost them. But then finally 2 hours later, which they would normally take 28 minutes in the direction that they were trained, it took them 2 hours to get home. Because what happened is when I let them go 17 miles out here, they were thinking that they were on this side of the loft, so they started flying even further away because they had been used to being dropped over on this side, and instead I dropped them on this side, so they started flying like crazy going south, in this illustration west, and then they started flying. So I'm guessing they started flying and they flew for probably about a half an hour and realized, hey, we're not home yet. So then they turned around and maybe they went a couple of different directions until they finally made it home. So when you're training a bird to come home from a far distance, you just always want to go in increments. So maybe 1 mile, 1.5, 2 miles. If you're losing birds, you're dropping them too far, or they just weren't good birds, and you shouldn't worry about losing those birds anyway. But yeah, you always just you just go out in increments, just a little bit further every time until they're comfortable in one direction. And like I said, mine were just homing birds. They weren't racing birds, and they were making 17 miles in about 28 minutes, and that felt pretty comfortable with that. And they would only get faster every time. So that's what I would suggest you do if you as you start distance training your birds. There's a lot of different techniques and a lot of different racers that will say, well, you got to do it this way, you got to do it this way. This way worked for me. And like I said, these aren't exact numbers, but they're pretty close to how I distance trained my bird. And so yeah. That's one of the main questions I'm asked on my pigeon channel. So comment, rate, subscribe. Let me know what you think. I really wish I still had my birds. I'll put a little clip on here about where my birds are at now. I gave them to my niece, and well, I'll put that at the end of this clip. Well, this is already 9 minutes long, so maybe I won't. Anyway, thanks for visiting, and this has been New Pigeon Guy. Wow. That's horrible. Anyway. Thanks, guys.